Here's an update video on a few projects that have been kind of melded together. I'm going to be talking about this simple water feature that I set up a few weeks ago and what's working, what isn't. Overall it's working in a way that I feel good about, but there's definitely some gotchas and adjustments that I would have made. And I want to review the softwood cuttings propagation bubbling system now that it's evolved and simplified, and share some notes with folks about what's working there. And that project overall has been incredibly rewarding and affirmative. Some little issues, but we'll talk about that too. So stick around. First order of business will be to talk about this water feature. This holds about 150 plus gallons. I will link here to the video where I talk about the construction of this, but it's very, very simple. Greenhouse plastic, which can be reused later, has not leaked at all. No issues whatsoever with that. It feels like it's safe and stable overall. And now that we've got this wooden rim around it, I put a piece of shale from an old quarry on there as well. And Sasha's been putting her houseplants on the north and east side, which adds a little bit of beauty. I think it helps the houseplants get some nice moist microclimate. Takes advantage or takes a yield from having that ridge there. You'll notice floating in here as a start of a nod towards creating some ecosystem. It's a pretty sterile space overall without it, but we have some very simple locust boards floating in there that I put some watercress chunks. I just drape them over with the idea that they'll be able to root into the water. With the aeration, they seem like they like a nice moving water, and it's a raft where frogs can land on and bop around, or if a bird or a creature falls in, they can land on this, and hopefully this will help filter the water. One thing I definitely will need to do here, a lot of people ask when I make these structures, what about mosquitoes? By and large, we haven't had mosquito issues, but this one, they're showing up. So today or in the next day or two, I will go out and get some 12-cent feeder fish from a pet store and probably put 6 to 8 of them in here. We'll add more logs and sticks and areas for them to hide out, but I think that'll take care of the mosquito issues. It's not as though we've been getting bitten by them, but they're in there. I can see the larvae, and it's time to deal with that. So that little bubbler so far has been working great. 8 ports in total. All 8 are activated now. 4 are in this water feature, which I just talked about. 2 are in our compost tea bubbler, which we've simplified into this vertical stack. I don't have any leaves in here right now. Right now it's blackstrap molasses and seaweed, fish emulsion, and very simple bubbler system here. This lets it be full bore rather than the air stones, which make a fine air. I just have a little rock tied onto the bottom of this, which makes a very coarse bubble, which stirs it like crazy. And what's nice is we can dip in here and scoop out water and water with it, or I can use this hose to fill containers as well. We'll go into more detail on that later. The other thing I wanted to talk about is in another video, which I'll link to here, we talk about using the bubbler to aerate rainwater to facilitate softwood propagation. So check that out for background info. But what I've done is, instead of using the half cut off 55-gallon drum, retired that. This is the last round of cuttings that came out of that. These have been in the ground now for about 2 weeks. Almost everybody's putting on new growth. The hardy kiwis certainly have rooted. This is all new growth since they've been planted. The sea berries in here, by and large, look great. It's important to show the failures too. I'm seeing some that have died. I would venture a guess in this area of sea berry, gumi, hardy kiwi, clove currant, some real high value perennial nursery plants. We're looking at about 80 to 90% success so far. The real question is, do they get to the fall and do they overwinter? The first round of cuttings that I did, these are the older ones, these are at about the same, 80 to 90% success. Sea berry doing great, the grapes looking beautiful. The failure in here well, remains to be seen, but the dwarf sour cherries, Carmine Jewel, which I'm very excited to be able to propagate somehow, not the most happy. They're yellowing out, but I feel like they might still be okay. But we haven't been watering these much at all now, once every few days. But this new system, by having two of them, so I need to fill this one too, instead of the mesh where I'm putting individual cuttings through, I've kind of simplified it, and now I'm just using, I rinsed out a gallon pot, I put a rock at the bottom so it stays upright, and I'm putting groups of cuttings in one. The one thing I found with the last round is taking out each individual cutting with roots was a little bit irritating through the mesh. And here's some real simple ones. These are wildwood elderberry. These have been in here. Let's see if I can get this to focus. Sorry about that. No, maybe you're seeing it. These have been in here for 3 days. And all those white bumps are where roots will be shooting out very soon, starting to callus at the bottom. Boy, this is some professional camera work I'm doing here. Bear with me. We need a better camera someday. Anyway, they're beginning to root. We have mulberry softwood cuttings in here, which are challenging to root, and we'll see how that works. Part of the idea of having smaller containers and multiples, so I've got a bubbler and a bubbler, is this way I can do a full round of cuttings in one container, transplant them out into the softwood nursery bed, and then use this water to water existing cuttings that are in the bed and refresh the water. The larger trough, I was finding, after 2 to 3 weeks in the sun, I would describe the water as getting stale. It was getting darker, little smell to it, and with cuttings floating around, you kind of want to refresh it periodically. So this lets me have 2 separate bays. I'm going to fill this one with grape and more sea berry, and this one I'll do some more mulberry and other vines. So there you have it. So in total, we're drawing 12 watts, 24/7. So basically, the electric draw is that of a compact fluorescent in an area where we've got an aerated water feature that still needs some ecosystem service, still needs some diversity in there, but we're getting there. Compost tea bubbler, which feels functional, but could certainly use more leaf litter and actual compost. We'll evolve that as it goes. And a split system for softwood cuttings, which feels very promising. Fundamentally, for the cost, again, we're in $50 for the bubbler, $10, $15 for the air stones and the tubes, and the rest is all negligible, scavenged pieces. Let's say under $100 for a small pond, compost tea bubbling system, and a propagation system that can propagate high-value perennials. 10 successful cuttings will pay for this entire system. Incredibly worthwhile. So that is this system. I'm just going to pause on this and look at some other water-related things, since that's the theme of this video, and we'll go from there. Appropriately, it's starting to rain a little as I make this video, since I'm talking about water. Makes sense. So I'll keep my hand over the camera, and once it gets rainy enough, we'll have to stop. I made a video a ways back about sealing a small pond. This is that small pond. And so I went through with clay and compost and smeared it in really, really hard. We've since had 1.5 inches of rain, and by and large, I'd say the water's holding quite nicely. I think I may also add some bentonite clay to this, just to really seal the deal, so to speak. But I'm starting to commit this water space now to some interesting high-value perennial water plants, aquatic plants. So I've got my American lotus that I'm starting in these little tubs filled with clayey subsoil. And just recently I got some pickerel weed, I'm having a hard time saying all these words, from my good friend Akiva over at Twisted Tree. He's got some interesting aquatics. I just stuck those into the edge, put some compost and wood chips around them and a rock to hold them down. And you can see each of these tubs have water lotus. The frogs jumping back and forth between these containers has inoculated them with duckweed, which is really cute. And so once we get this pond to seal, we should be able to have duckweed, which we can harvest for the chickens, American water lotus, which should be able to overwinter, and hopefully pickerel weed as well. Maybe that's enough for a small space like this. But yeah, so in the containers, the American water lotus is working great. Next spring, I'll plan to do a whole series of videos on how we're starting them from seed. It feels like we've really worked out a system that works well. You can see the frogs are loving it in here. And we talked about this container. The water lotus is really evolving in here. They're starting to get tall and proud and happy. Big frog just leapt in there. And I actually harvested a bunch of duckweed from this yesterday, and it's already filled back in. So ecosystem-wise, even though it's weird in a plastic tub, it does feel like it's a healthy space. Beings are very content in there. So it's a good place for now, and then as we get to fall and winter, hopefully the ponds will really seal up and swell, and we can set them into a healthier place for them to overwinter. The solar pump and lifting from the spring and all that has been working, but I feel like this video has gone on long enough. There's some highlights touching on the water systems we're exploring this season, again always in the theme of keeping costs low, embodied energy low, and diversity and complexity as high as we can emotionally and physically afford. I'm just crossing my fingers that there are some components here that resonate with folks out there as useful and valuable. I'd love to hear from you if you're trying these things out, some of these concepts that I'm exploring, and they're working for you or they're not. Why not go ahead and comment? Maybe put a link to some photos or videos of these experiments that you're trialing, and let's keep the dialogue open. I'd love to hear how other folks take these basic seeds of ideas and evolve them. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.